Hey, everybody, this is Tom Sega from Duluth Pack, and this is the Duluth Pack podcast, Leader of the Pack. Boy, do we have a leader today. Our special guest is Jeffrey T. Larson Michelangelo. I added the Michelangelo because we were having a little sidebar earlier here, but Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh my gosh. So I am way out of my comfort zone right now, Jeff, because as we were talking earlier, I have no artistic ability or creative ability in this body. And you are a professionally, classically trained artist. This is going to be really cool because I want to just learn from you right now for the next hour. So let's jump right in, Jeff, and talk about your background, where you grew up, what your childhood was like, your influencers, and then how you got the artistic bug.
Yeah. Actually, I did start up in this area. My dad's first job out of college he's an engineer, and it was up at the Taconite expansion back in 1962. So I was born in Two Harbors. We didn't stick around all that long. We bounced around until I was about 6. And then we ended up in the western suburbs of Minneapolis. And that's where I grew up. In fact, my parents lived there until this last summer. They finally moved up to Duluth. So, but Duluth, then, because we started up here, a family would come camping up here a lot. And that played into how I ended up full circle, I guess, coming back. But yeah, grew up in the suburbs, typical childhood, played a lot of sports. I drew all the time, but just because I liked it, I didn't think much about it. Class artist, that whole thing, I guess. It worked in my favor best because I have this personality flaw where if I like something, I do it and I really dive in. If I don't like it, I don't. I pass a lot of book reports by, I get it back from the teacher. It's like, well, I'll give you a D for the report, but an A+ for the book cover. So we'll bounce it out at B-. And so anyway, so I guess I just was always strongly drawn to it. I didn't take it seriously though. Very much. My mom painted as a hobby. Actually, all the way through high school, I was not sure what I was going to do, and then with the rest of the football team, we took pottery, I guess, and I was the only guy that couldn't throw a pot. And so you get a guaranteed C if you went to the Art Institute as an after-school, thing, and so I did. And I'd never seen a real painting before. And I'd grown up, as a kid, I'd go to the library, I'd get books on Indians and mountain men, hockey players, and art. And those were kind of my 3 passions. So seeing a real painting was amazing. And I happened to come across a young man who was doing a copy of an amazing painting. And we chatted, and he told me about this place called Atelier, which I couldn't pronounce either. And but when I came back home, I told my mom, you're a hobby painter. You love to paint. We've never gone to the Institute. So several weeks later, we went. And that young guy was on his last day doing the copy. And he remembered me, and we chatted. And he said, you really should. If you like art, you got to check this school out I go to. It was called Atelier Lack. I said, oh, okay, great. And I called the gentleman, Richard Lack, who ran it. And he said, oh, come on down. And it was like walking back to the 1800s. It was a school. And we can get into this a little bit later, maybe just kind of the history of it. But the school itself is in uptown Minneapolis, and it basically a small little studio with 18 young artists, working around the models, setting up still lifes. It was just like something you'd see, like I said, you imagine back in the 1800s, which it was based on. The let's see, Richard Lack, and we had several conversations. And we talked on the phone. He kept saying, if you like art this much, you really need to think about coming to the school. I mean, you need a training. And I don't know. And I'd actually signed up for college, actually UMD. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but anyway, he invited me out to his studio, and I went out there, and I knocked on the door, opened the door, I walked in, and it was just like, boom. It just flooded me. It's like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And it just pounded into me that I completely switched gears where I want to be an artist. How do I sign up? It made no sense. It wasn't a logical decision. And he flipped. It's funny because he flipped on me then. He's like, no, I don't know if I want you. And I'm like, no, you've been talking to me about, I should look at your school. He says, no, you don't want to be an artist. And we started this argument. And it just baffled me. I don't get it. You told me, we've been having a conversation. So I don't get what this is about. And he just says, listen, here's the deal. If I even accept you, which I probably won't, you're going to have to study 4 or 5 years. When you get out, you're going to have to work full time as an artist, plus probably push a broom or wait tables for another 10 years to get good enough to even find out if you have any talent. If you decide you do and you still stick with it, you're going to be poor the rest of your life. And I'm like, yeah, sign me up. He's like, well, take some night classes and we'll see what you can do. And at that time, there was the school itself. Again, we can get in that a little bit later, but there's probably one of less than 10 left in the world that still offered this training that went back 500 years. And there was a lot of people that would apply and try to get in. So I took every night class. I'd call them every 2-3 weeks, bring work that I'd done on the weekends, really just bugged them. And finally, well, it was months. I had to call the university and say I'm not coming. My dad, the engineer, was so proud of his firstborn deciding not to go to college and become an artist. He thought that was great, being really sarcastic. But probably in July, he finally said, okay, we'll accept you. So anyway, the first day of school in the fall, I met the assistant instructor, and I'm telling him the story. And I'm like, I don't get it. And he just started laughing. And he's just, that first day you walked into his studio, he called me right after you left. He said, yeah, we got a new student. And I'm like, well, what was this whole thing about? And he says, he got serious. He kind of said, he just knew if you didn't fight to get in, you wouldn't fight after you got out to stay with it. And it was pretty wise, actually.
Wow. So you were getting a bunch of advice and you had no idea why you were even getting the advice.
Yeah, he just wanted to see if I jumped through the hoops.
If you had the work ethic, the chutzpah to stick with it and fight your way through.
Yep, exactly.
I like that guy already.
Yeah, he was a wise man. And, it's funny because people think talent. Yeah, everybody's aware. You got talent. You're talented enough. Talent's common. I mean, think about how many kids you knew in grade school, junior high school that were amazing athletes. How many are playing pro? And how many could have? It depends on so many variables. And the talent really doesn't show until you're as trained as everybody else. And then we see what, then the Wayne Gretzky's float to the top and so on.
Well, we better not get into hockey because we'll be here for about 4.5 hours, Jeff. So pronounce once again the name of the school, because I phonetically put it here. I can read Richard Lack, but Altier?
It's atelier is the best
Atelier.
I can. And it just, my understanding, it translates loosely to the studio of. And so it was a training methodology that formed in primarily Paris in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, where it was more of a private apprenticeship in a sense, where young students would study with one particular artist instead of going to the École des Beaux-Arts or one of the other fine arts academy. That was the predominant training methodology back then.
Jeff, did you go overseas to study then, or was that taking place here stateside?
It was actually in uptown Minneapolis, of all places. Like I said, there was probably, we knew of about 7 or 8 schools left in the world that were still teaching this. I guess maybe this would be a good thing to throw out there, is that, the history of Western art, and my art in particular, since most people have no clue who I am, is representational, naturalism, realism, whatever you want to say. But it's based on, I'm just passionately in love with the nature, with the beauty of this world. With I see more beauty outside of me than I can ever imagine in my mind. And so I fell right in from day one as a young child, looking at art books of Michelangelo and Rembrandt and Da Vinci and all the great artists. And that history, it started in ancient Greece, took a little hiatus during the Dark Ages, and then picked itself back up again in the later Middle Ages, and progressed steadily all the way until the turn of the 1900s. And it was basically a system where one individual had some talent, or whatever you want to say, got a name. Young students would come and want to study with them. They'd learn from the master. They'd make improvements or adjustments. They'd take on students. And generation after generation, best practices were pushed forward. People look back at art history, it's like the geniuses, but they would have never existed if it wasn't for this methodology of training, like would be in any other field. Mozart would have been Mozart without a history of, music conservatories and ballet and architecture and literature. We all have our craft. And so that grew steadily until it hit the late 1880s. Probably in my mind, one of the highlights of the history of the art world is in Paris alone. They had more styles, more individuals, more people painting phenomenal paintings in personal ways because of the training. And all that just about disappeared by 1930, 1940. Modernism had come in. It swept the world. The world was changing. Obviously, you had when the Industrial Revolution had kicked in, went from an agricultural society primarily around the world to moving into cities. You had Darwin, throwing in a whole new paradigm of secularism. You had monarchies and kingdoms and royalties disappearing, communism forming, and it was just a chaotic time. And then they throw in World War One, which was dumb, and through, not only was it horrible, but it, created a final big distrust in the ruling class. It followed by the epidemic, which killed more people than World War One did, and then follow that with the Great Depression. And people were, they wanted change, they wanted modernism, they wanted something new. That's healthy, and that happened in all the arts. In music, you had Schoenberg, you had in architecture, in dance, you had modern dance. So, the thing that they didn't do, though, was they didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. They pretty quickly realized this is really good and healthy to experiment, but if you're going to be a modern dancer, you're still going to study ballet. If you're going to be a atonal musician, you're still going to study Mozart, and so on and so forth. Except the visual arts, they threw it away. And it only took about a generation and a half, 2 generations, where there was just a small handful of people left who not only knew how to paint in this great tradition and all the studio lure and craftsmanship that had been passed on, even a smaller group or handful that were still teaching it. So that's when we get to 1980, when I came on the scene. Again, we knew it was pre-internet, so maybe there was a few more, unless someone wrote about it or you knew somebody, you didn't hear about it. But there really was maybe 7, 8, 9 schools left in the world where it was this unbroken tradition going back. And Lack himself, he had studied with a gentleman named Gamel in Boston, who was born in the late 1800s, who had studied with an American named Paxton, who had studied in the École des Beaux-Arts under Jerome, who was probably the most famous artist in the world at that time. Jerome studied with Delaroque with Gross with Glear with David. And David, you'd recognize his painting because he's the one who painted Napoleon rearing up on the horse. So that's my pedigree, I guess, if you want to call it that.
Jeff, tell us a little more about Richard Lack. I mean, how did he carry then this methodology that was 500 years old forward and start his school? How did that all come about?
Yeah, he kind of the same story as me. He wanted to be an artist, but he really had trouble trying to find a place to paint. In fact, it's a very similar story. Now I'm thinking about it. He, back in the 50s, he was in New York and basically came across a guy doing a copy of a painting at the Metropolitan. That young guy told him there's an artist up in Boston who he studied with, and there was only one other person I can think of at that time who was training people in America. And so Lack went, and I think he got the same treatment. He went and he called ahead and knocked on the door, and the guy said, well, you can't come in and see. I think he made him come back 3 mornings in a row or something like that before he let him in the studio just to see if he'd fight. And so anyway, he was real blessed then to meet and study with Gamel. And so that's where that went. And Richard Lack, he we really stand on the shoulders of giants. He lived through a time period where no one would buy representational painting, really. I mean, he struggled, and he was a phenomenal artist, a Renaissance man and a scholar. And Gamel was born independently wealthy, so he didn't have to worry about it. And that's one reason he was able to carry on through the first half of for most of the century. But Lack fought, and he was tough, and he just knew that it was going to die out, and he just formed a school. And he also told me too, he said, the other reason he formed the school, he just wanted someone he could talk to about art that loved it the way he did. And he was hoping that someday he'd have enough students well trained that he could have a good conversation with.
That's pretty interesting. Wow. So you and I are right there. We're the same age. So this is you're studying in Minneapolis from 80 to 84, but in 83, I did some deep diving here and you studied human anatomy. So how did that work into your creative and what you were doing at the time?
Yeah. So, what you know, what my part of what I want to do in paint is paint portraits and figure pieces and so on. And to do so, you need to understand the anatomy, the physiology, and there really wasn't any good courses. I ended up calling the gentleman who ran the ran the department at the University of Minnesota, and I'm trying to explain. I wanted to see if I could come and watch an autopsy, or while they worked on cadavers, just so I could understand how the muscles worked and do some drawings. And he's trying to what? And what are you doing? I go to the atelier lac. I take night classes there. Are you seriously? Yeah, come on down. I'll get you in. So he would sneak me in maybe I shouldn't say, well, it was 40 years ago. So he'd sneak in at night. And basically, I thought I was going to like watch. He's like, I left one out for you. So he'd leave bodies out for me so I could draw. And I would do that after hours and studied anatomy that way.
Wow. You were just so passionate that you wanted to make sure you didn't miss anything. This is really fun. So then you go to art study throughout Europe. Bring us forward to that.
Yeah. So then when I got married to Heidi, who was another artist, we scrimped and saved. And our first trip over was our honeymoon for a couple of months, and we pretty much just lived in the museums and been back a number of times and traveled out through the United States and just spent. We'll ask our kids. I spent way too much time in museums, but it was for an artist, it's like going to school. I mean, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's all laid there in the canvas. If you know how to look for it, you can understand the technique, how they thought, how they saw things, and it just it's always a wealth of information every time I go.
And private foundries. So studying bronze castings and finishing. What is that all about, and what does that entail?
Yeah, so walking through one of the museums, I came across the sculptor Rodin, the thinker, and everybody's pretty familiar with him. And it just stopped me in my tracks. And I think I thought back then, at least, that if I had found a school that was as good in sculpture as I had found for painting, I might have switched. I just fell in love with sculpture. So I did that on the side for many years. And so same thing, I went and kind of worked out a deal and sort of apprenticed at a foundry, did a lot of the basic work on my own pieces, and basically taught myself how to sculpt and cast bronze and so on. So that was just something I did alongside the full time of painting. So
Jeff, one of the things that as we're doing research on your career and we're looking at this is we see there's a tremendous amount out there. And folks, Jeffrey T. Larson, you can look him up online. Jeff will get all of your social handles because we want to send our viewers to look you up at the end here. But there's so many gallery showings and so many exhibitions that you've done with your artwork. First, can you tell us lay people, what's the difference between a gallery show and an exhibition?
they can overlap, I guess. They're actually pretty interchangeable. A gallery show, there's for the artist, you basically have just several avenues of venues. If you're like most artists, not interested in business or they're just not geared that way, or you're shy, best is probably to hook up with a good gallery, and they'll do all the marketing and promotion and selling for you. They'll do it for probably 50% what final price is. And so that's the downside. And the good gallery is worth it, just like paying for marketing, and everything else is expensive, but it's hard to find a good gallery. If you do it on your own, like from my example, it worked out where my wife, when she came down to go to art school, she just answered an ad in the newspaper, and it was to be a nanny, housekeeper, so on. Ended up being just the most wonderful family that was, I guess you'd say, old money down in Lake Minnetonka. I think they own the biggest private piece of property, in fact, on Lake Minnetonka. So very, very well off. after we were married, they became more friends. And we, if I kind of rudely and boldly, probably looking back, asked them if they could host a show for us, which they did. They were so nice. They opened up their house. We took down everything they had. We hung up all our work. And then they invited, I guess you'd say it was the who's who of, Minneapolis and people that own Cargill Corporation, that group. So they came to the show. Actually, it was kind of funny because we put every penny plus some I borrowed from my dad into our show. We just rolled the dice and like, here it goes. And they catered it and it was phenomenal and people loved it and everybody had fun. And at the end of the night, we sitting around and looked around. We hadn't sold a thing. And so again, I'm just not going to mention names. I don't have permission, but the woman was so nice. Like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's my private phone number book. Me and my husband are going to go out of town for a week. The house is yours. You get there and you call everybody that was there and you tell them to come back and they need to look at it again. That was my first venue into telemarketing, I guess. And in fact, I had all these notes. I'm writing, scribbling on the paper. I called this person. I left a message. I didn't get a hold of them. I get a hold of this one lady because I couldn't read my notes anymore. I'd given her my spiel and she says, you've called me 7 times. If I come, will you not call me anymore?
Then you said, only if you buy a painting.
She came and bought 5 pieces and became one of my best clients for the next 30 years. So it actually, by the end of the week, we did okay. That became the basis of, we had another show with them, and then we moved it to my parents' house, and we moved it to an academy. And then I was able to kind of, I had quite a guest list by that time of these type of people. So I was able to approach one of the better galleries in the Twin Cities and strike a much better deal than 50-50. If I bring you these clients, I want to have one-man shows with you, and here's how we're going to do it. And it turned out to be a real win-win. And we did that for 20 years. Every 2-3 years, I'd be off painting on my own. I'd come back and we'd hang the show and we'd have catalogs and it was just a great event. We'd sell most everything and head back north again. And then eventually he retired. And this is in the Galleria down in the Twin Cities. So it's kind of the luxury mall of the Twin Cities. And the gentleman who owned it, he was also at that time a client. But it was kind of nice. The restaurants, the other stores asked if we could work out some deal because a lot of people would come and they get business. And so we struck a deal where if a store would leave, he'd give me a call, Jeff. Okay, hey, the store over, Restoration Hardware is going to be gone next October. Do you want the space? It's like, yeah, I'll take it. And so I'd hire a staff and I had a whole team then, and we just go into gear and we put together a gallery for a month. And that was kind of how we were able to do business. And so to go back to the gallery model, if you have a $10,000 painting, you've got $800 in a frame, $400, $500 in shipping is a large piece. So you get $1,200 into it. They sell it for 10. They pay you 5. You're getting what is at 38. Taxes are going to take a third of that. So you're getting about $2,500 on a $10,000 sale. My shows, with me doing all the marketing, hiring staff, promo, everything, I think I was at like 27% of cost. And that's how we were able then to create this life where we would just every couple of years put on a big show and make enough to go back and just paint, live.
Wow. And so that's a gallery, but what is an exhibition then?
Okay, so yeah, thank you. So a gallery show, you either be part of a group show or have your own show, and they might call it an exhibition. I guess what I did, since it was more of a big one-man show, probably fell into an exhibition, and that it was an event that would take place periodically. They're pretty similar. I don't know if there's a real definitive difference, but
okay. So a question for you. You said that when you first met Richard Lack, he said you're going to study like crazy, you're going to do all this work, and you're going to be working a second job in a restaurant, bussing tables or serving. That part of it. Now you're just talking about doing the shows and getting successful and doing all of that, Jeff. Prior to that, to make ends meet, did you have other jobs as Richard Lack had said? Did you know that America's original manufacturer of canoe and kayak stabilizers was recently featured on Fox and Friends? Spring Creek Manufacturing was recognized on Fox News for being a leader in the Made in the USA industry for their top quality truck racks, the world's best camp saw, and their assortment of water sports equipment, including stabilizers for canoes, kayaks, and stand-up paddleboards, as well as their canoe seats and motor mounts. Enjoy an exclusive 15% off, yes, 15% off your next online order at springcreek.com with the code LEADER15, that is LEADER 15. Exclusions apply. Now, back to the podcast.
I well, sort of. When I said it was successful shows, that's a relative statement. That meant we could, buy food, pay rent, but in the early years. So I think we did the starving artist thing for about 10 years. But when I was at the atelier, I started teaching the night classes. So typically, and this is how our school is structured also, is that we have the full-time students who are real dedicated and they're here for 4 or 5 years, and we pass on this craftsmanship. But we also offer it to anybody off the streets to come in, 1, 2, 3 nights a week, whatever they want to sign up for. And we don't water it down. We teach them the exact same things. It's just parsed out more slowly. And I think people have a thought, maybe, or a misconception that I'll never become an artist. It's too hard. That's the beauty of this training that had been passed on. They started with kids back in the Renaissance and medieval times. You just start with the most basic fundamental things, and you just progressively, they get a little bit harder. So you don't come to a school like this and jump in and be expected to paint some great painting. We'll show you how to sharpen a pencil and make a line, so the Atelier Lac had just a thriving night school. So I taught there. And then it was real fortunate where an older student who had graduated a number of years earlier decided to open her own school, a sister school. And so she asked me to be the assistant director and head instructor. So I jumped into that right after I graduated and did that for several years. So that was wonderful. I had a studio there. So that kept me going. And then I just decided, I guess by that point, we started the shows. My wife was in the first batch of students. I joke her grades started slipping and she got friendly, but anyway, we fell in love, got married, and that's when we started doing these shows. And kind of within about four years or so, felt we were doing well enough where we could get out of the cities where, again, I'd been camping up in Duluth a lot. My grandparents, both sets of my grandparents were farmers. And so we go weekends and summers, stay there and play in the woods. And so I just wanted to get out of the cities. My wife grew up in Roseau. She knows the Brottons, by the way. She grew up in a cabin in the woods. So basically, we just found an old school up on the South Shore of Lake Superior and moved up there as soon as we could, thinking we could market long distance in the Twin Cities, which we couldn't. We just about starved.
But you had the cabin in the woods, though.
Yeah, well, actually, it was a 7,500 square foot old school building that the town of Cloverland was giving away almost. So we picked that thing up. That's a great studio space and had its own gymnasium. So
let's first of all, I want to go back. And so for our special guest for our listeners today is Jeffrey T. Larson, professionally, classically trained artist, painting, art. But this all, it's ironic to me because this started because of football. You said that in football, we took this tour, and art, literally, you got the bug from art, and you had mentioned that you were doing some clay, but then you had also gone and done some studying in bronze casting and finishing. So you kind of came full circle on that to become a very well accepted and professional artist that now you're in business. And I want to move forward to all of a sudden in Duluth, Great Lakes Academy of Fine Art. Tell us about that, your school. Jeff, tell us about the church you bought and how all of that went about and the successes of your school, because now if I had to say, you're considered the master. You're the new Richard Lack.
Yeah, that's another way of saying I've just gotten a lot older. But yeah, so I taught those, first years, and then decided I was just going to focus and work on being an artist, and that's what I did for the next 25 plus years, and it was wonderful. So we had 3 kids, and our eldest, we left. So my wife's an artist, her dad's an artist. My mom then ended up going to the same school I went to after I graduated. So he was kind of like condemned from birth. That apple just dropped and didn't move an inch. So he pretty early on was quite amazing, and decided he was going to follow in the footsteps, become an artist. And so he decided he was going to go back to the same school I went to, which was now being run by 2 of my fellow colleagues. Richard Lack has passed away, and so I approached them. I said, one, I just want to continue being part of my son's life during this stage, and I said, hey, let's make a deal. I'll come down and I'll teach for free, once a month, but you can maybe cut his tuition a little bit, and we'll just kind of work out this deal. So it was great. I'd come and hang out with my son and teach, and I'd be giving these critiques. And now at this point, I mean, I've been, I've been an artist for 30 years. I had magazine covers, won international competition. I mean, I was doing fine. Thought I kind of knew what I was doing. And I'd be critiquing these advanced students. I'd be listening to what I'd say. Well, I think you should do this and X and Y and Z. And I'd be listening to myself thinking, that makes no sense. This really doesn't. And I'd go back, and for the next month, I'd go, why did that sound so goofy to me? That's what I do. And I'd think about it. So it really was, I gave myself a whole other education. In the 4 or 5 years he studied, I completely changed the way I paint. And I think it was just kind of by having a good coach, or by teaching yourself verbally instead of intuitively, just doing what you do, changed everything. Well, he was, when he graduated, he was kind of offered the opportunity maybe to continue on and eventually someday maybe even take over the school. I was also offered to co-run a school in Florence, Italy. I was kind of contemplating that. And then so we just kind of thought, well, you know what? Maybe we should just form our own school. And I kind of wanted him to have his own experience like I did, opening a school and forced to verbalize, everything he had just learned. We really both have the passion to give back. I mean, if we hadn't had the training we had, we'd be nobody. I mean, it's such a game changer. It's just so foundational, essential, and just so rare that we just wanted to pass this on. And so anyway, we started looking for a building. I've been associated with a number of other schools, and happily since when I was a student, there's kind of a mini renaissance going on of schools forming around the world. So there's probably a good 20 to 30 pretty solid schools, with a dozen really good schools around the world right now passing this on. And I've seen their business models, and most of them rent, and they said the old thing where you find a building to rent in the worst part of town, and then cafes open up and restaurants, and pretty soon it's gentrified and you get kicked out. And I just seen that happen over and over. So I was determined I was going to buy something and create a business model that was sustainable. Started looking around all over. This is when Lincoln Park was still cheap, and but a buddy told me about old St. Peter's Church in Little Italy up on the hill here, and drove by, and it had been shut down and not quite condemned, but they had cut out the radiators and turned the electricity off, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years earlier. And unbeknownst to me, there was a real battle going on to save it. I was just looking at it that if I was to design and build a school and build it, it'd be 40 by 100, 2 floors, north-facing windows, tall ceilings. That's what this was. Just wouldn't have stone, And so we were kind of doing our due diligence and thinking about it. It was in rough shape. I had an architect looking at it, and we just weren't sure. And anyway, we were forced to make a bid early, and all the advertising that the roof was shot and it moved off his foundation proved to be wrong. And so we got it, and we secured financing and spent the next 18 months with a whole bunch of tradespeople and myself and my son and my wife and some good friends working for 18 months, 6, 7 days a week, 12, 18 hours a day. And pretty soon we had a school.
Jeff, one of the things I was looking at some videos that you've done and some podcasts, and one of the things was a theme that I got from it was not to be afraid of hard work. And obviously, all of your steps of the way have taken an extraordinary amount of energy and effort to get there. And now you're starting your own business, you're buying your own building, which needed a tremendous amount of work. Talk about some of the challenges that getting into business as an entrepreneur. You've been an entrepreneur, but now as a owning your own school to train others and buying this old church, some of the challenges from when you bought it all the way up to today. And we'll talk about through the from 2020 to 2022, everything had its challenges in the world as well. And how the heck do you train people in art when most people are social distancing? So a kind of a mouthful, but let's talk about those things.
Yeah, well, the building, like I said, it was a mess. It was just nasty and moldy. There was like a ice waterfall coming down the corner. But I found good plumbers, good electricians, friends that had good experience building, and so I think the bottom line was sort of ignorance is bliss, slightly. The school I had mentioned, the school building we had bought and lived in, we did the same thing for many years. So I had some experience myself in carpentry and basic, construction, this and that. So I was able to do quite a bit of it. But we just jumped in. You mentioned hard work. It's like name anybody that does anything that succeeds that doesn't work hard. It just is what it is. And so I guess the challenge, 18 months, it did get long. We ran out of money before we could mud the place. So me and my son did most of that. And I hate mudding, and but I guess looking back, it could have been a lot worse. We'd gotten bids on a roof that he said it's going to be at least $50,000, maybe $250,000. I think it shot. My wife has an uncle that is in charge of all the buildings for the North Dakota University system, and started out as a roofer. We called Craig. Hey, listen, can you give us some advice? He says, you know what? We haven't seen each other before. I'm going to come and visit you. He drove down. That in 2 weekends and $600 later, we had the entire roof fixed. It was 12 little holes. That was it. So we fell into some really good fortune over and over like that. But I think, we had a lot of people working really hard, and they just pulled together.
What does it take to set up a business like yours? So you have your church, you've redone the church. It's now your business to have your school. What does the curriculum look like? You're using the same curriculum, I'm assuming, that you went through, because that's an old style of training. But are you doing part-time? Are you doing full-time? Are you doing people who are advanced, people that are beginners? And then how do you even set it up?
Yeah, so this, what gets passed on is the principles and foundational training, but everybody kind of gives their own little take on it. There's some things that are quite similar from school and atelier and academy across the board, but there's, it's like in anything, you could go to a chef school, different chef schools, and there's just going to be different philosophies, techniques, approaches, personalities, and that's what adds all the spice to life, and so we I took what I'd learned, I took what I'd read, I took what I've done, and then I don't have all the answers. I looked around, and as I mentioned, there's a number of other good schools run by people I really respect, friends of mine, and I basically stole some of their techniques and some of their ideas. And so I tried to put together the school I wish I had gone to. And my son was very helpful in that too, with his experience. So basically it's still a small little world in our world. We're kind of like when modernism came in, they came in with a vengeance and kind of pushed, I don't want to be derogatory anyway, but they kind of pushed us down to stand up taller maybe. And so we kind of all went underground in a way. And so we kind of feel like it's a new avant-garde. We're coming full circle. And so anybody who is passionate about learning this type of work, especially with the internet now, they can find out what's going on in the world. And they talk to one person and they'll tell, well, here's where you need to talk to. Here's where you need to go. So we were still just trying to, clean up the mess here. And we were getting people applying right and left. And so that part was actually far easier than I thought. We formed night schools, and we've had some students from the area who's been studying with us for 4 or 5 years, doing just phenomenal work. We've recently, in the last couple of years, added a children's class, which is an amazing opportunity. I have a friend that same training as I had, but had a passion for teaching kids. Most schools, and going back for the last 100 years, there's been different training methods for kids. And they kind of work. It's more of a watered down system of what we do. He recognized that, and he dug deeper into the medieval times. That's when they were training 8, 9, 10-year-olds. In the Renaissance, it was more, older, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And he actually found literature on how they train these kids. And so he instituted that into his school in the Twin Cities. It's been a roaring success for 25 years, to the point where George Lucas from Star Wars heard about it, flew him out. There was talks of him building a university around my friend's training methodologies for kids. And then something happened with the real estate in LA, or somehow I got sidelined. But we were the only other people that have access to his patent on this training. And so my wife runs that program, and it's just these little 10-year-old, 12-year-old kids, you wouldn't believe the work they're doing. It's just been really fun and fascinating. And I would have killed for something like that if I was a kid. So that's kind of our main structure. The full-time program, we'd be completely full if we had 16 students. We take 4 a year. More than that, I don't think we could give them the hands-on that they need. And they basically, like I said, they show up. It's from 9 to 5 every day. The studio's open 24/7. I encourage them to stay late, come on weekends. They just can't get enough hours and work hard enough to get as good as they need to be. And we just start with the most basic. Here's how you sharpen a pencil correctly. Here's how you draw a simple line. Here's how you then see values. How do you see color? How do you do composition? And it just slowly builds on itself over the course of 4 or 5 years.
Wow. So you just hit on something there on the amount of hours that they need to practice your trade. And I want to bounce back to the business of selling your paintings. First of all, I want to ask, is there an average time that goes into doing a painting?
No, not really. I mean, if you go on, I paint everything from life. We don't really work from photographs at all. So if I was to paint a landscape, I go out at 3 o'clock on a sunny day and set up in the same spot. And an hour and a half later, the sun's changed enough where that's not the same scene anymore. So I'll come back the next day and the next day. And, to do a little sketch, you can do it in a day or two, a little quick portrait, maybe a couple, 2, 3 days. But I just finished one painting I worked on for 5 years. I'd say most of my paintings take 3 to 6 months.
Wow. And so that just blows me away, because then how in the heck, let me stop for a second. A business like ours is pretty simple. We take labor, we take raw materials, and we build a product. We have our cost of goods sold, bills of materials, we price the product, we have a retail price. How do you price your product then?
It's an ongoing good question that we have with our students every year. My story was I just started out really cheap and I sold a lot of stuff. But there's a funny dynamic that takes place too. I remember I had hit a point early on where I had a lot of work and I had really cheap prices, I thought, and nothing was selling, and that's embarrassing. So I thought, I'm going to triple my prices, and if they don't sell, that makes sense. They're too expensive. I just feel better about it. And I did that, and they all sold. So there's the funny thing about art. There's no intrinsic value. I mean, it's a piece of canvas with color smeared on it. It's not like a car or something you can use. And so it's all perceived value. And so part of it is in valuing it is what the market can bear. 2, what is your perceived competition, people that you consider yourself similar to, or what are they getting for it? And really, to answer it most simply, once I kind of got an established set of prices for average type of work, a still life, a portrait, a still life, and so on, then every year and a half, 2 years, I'd go up 10%. And so over the last 40 years, it's added up to be where you don't have to sell as many paintings and you do fine. And hopefully your marketing's kept up with it and you've expanded your list and your reputation's grown and so on. That was one reason I worked with galleries. I had that ongoing show I did, but prior to the internet, the only way you got advertising was really if you were advertising a magazine. That was the holy grail. And galleries were the ticket. Either you got an editor to write a story about you, which I was fortunate to have that happen a number of times. But to take out an ad back in the 80s, 90s was a full page, was like $3,500, which, but what is that now? That's 10 grand, or I couldn't afford that. So I'd work with some galleries out on the East Coast, and that's how they earned their 50% in a sense, was that they would take out ads and they would spread my name nationwide and internationally. And so those were my two venues. So it cost me more, but I gained my marketing through the galleries, and then I made my profits more or less from my own personal private shows.
I have so many questions here because I know I'm bouncing all over, but before we move on, Jeff, tell people how they find your website and what social media handles do you have that our listeners can go and they can see what your school's about, what your art's about, and learn more about you as an artist.
Yeah, no, thank you. So yeah, my website's jeffreytlarson.com. I'm on Instagram under the same name. The Great Lakes Academy of Fine Art is where you can find the school. But also, if you go to YouTube and punch in Jeffrey T. Larson documentary, a filmmaker out of England did an hour-long documentary on our life and the school and so on. And if you're really curious, you could watch that also.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because what a segue, because that was my next question for you. Tell us about the documentary from 2018 and on your life and all that, and how did that come about, and how did it all, how did you feel the outcome of it was?
Yeah, no, it was really a fun thing. It was an artist friend of mine who also he's really quite a young entrepreneur. He does a lot of film, he does a lot of marketing, along with his painting. But he had formed a group where they were doing educational training videos, with the artists that he respected or whatever. So he and his the videographers from England, and he had a partner, and they came and filmed me for a week, showing how I paint still lifes. We were just sitting around the fire one day, and we're talking, and brought up I don't know if you haven't seen the show Chef's Table on Netflix. It was something that we serendipitously both had fallen into and seen. It's basically a really well filmed, well done hour-long episodes where they kind of dive into a Michelin star chef's life. And it's just how was he trained, how they get their restaurant, but the filming, the pace, the music, it had this really wonderful edge. And so we were talking about how we love that show, of all things. When you should do something about artists, like something like that on artists. Well, he went back and they talked, and they said, let's give it a shot. And so they invited me to be the first, do the first pilot film. So we worked on this, not really so much a script, but they had me dive into all my history and find photographs and this and that for about a year. And then they came back and we filmed it over the course of 7 days, 10 days. And then Joe Hawkins is the filmmaker, and he went back and took my ramblings and hundreds of hours of film and turned it into this documentary. And what worked out wonderfully, that was the first year that Catalyst Festival had their first big event in Duluth. And so we thought, why not? Let's submit it. And we actually won best documentary in Minnesota or something like that. And so that led to where we were actually having conversations with Hulu, Bravo, Oprah's channel. We had a lead to get to Netflix, and because our goal was to turn this into a series, just like the Chef's Table. And then COVID hit. So that was one thing that by time we just lost all momentum and all contacts and all interest from the different places. And so that ended that. But we got a nice little film out of it. So
yeah, you know what? I watched it and it was awesome. And I think our viewers should watch it, and they can find it on your website, Jeffrey T. Larson.
Nope, you have to go to YouTube. You have to go to YouTube and punch in Jeffrey T. Larson documentary.
Well, I must have done it through there because I was able to see it, and I did. I got there through your website, and actually, once I started watching your videos, which I thought was awesome, it must have kicked me over to YouTube, so I was able to see it. It's really cool.
Good. You gotta go to my website more often, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So, folks, our special guest today is Jeffrey T. Larson, and you can find him at jeffreytlarson.com. He owns the Great Lakes Academy of Fine Art in Duluth, Minnesota. You need to go and look up his website if you have any interest in art at all. Amazing career, amazing person. This has been a blast, but we are going to switch gears now. We're going to get away from career, Jeff. We're going to go to what we call our packed question segment because we're just going to learn a little bit about you as a person. Now, this was about your career, but we're going to learn a little about you. So I'm going to start with this. Other than Jeff Larson, who's your favorite artist?
That's a tough one. It changes every week. So it's going to be an obscure artist named Jacqueline Sorolla. He was a Spanish artist that I lived, I think he passed away in 1920, but no one in the history of the world has ever painted outdoor figures, outdoor flesh. He painted a lot of mothers and babies on the beach of Spain in Valencia. And you squint when you look at those paintings. And it's been my passion for 30 years since I first saw his show to try to figure out how he did what he did, and in my own little way, try to do it my way. But he's the one that I keep coming back to, just the most amazed. Second would be an artist called Velasquez. Lived in the 1600s and just the greatest of the greats. So there you go. Two up-tier artists.
And Jeff Larson. Come on, we got to throw that in there. What is the favorite place that you have ever traveled?
We've been around the world and a lot of beautiful places, but what's hitting me now is I think the time's up in the Quetico when the sun's setting and you just finish frying up some fish and it's just a perfect evening, and I think that it's probably my happy place. I mean, Switzerland's nice, and there's other places, but that the Quetico is just magical.
Well, tomorrow night I'll be within a mile of the Quetico at this time.
Oh, lucky you.
I'm going to be very lucky, and I'm going to be watching those sunsets that you're talking about. Jeff, favorite movie?
Oh, Gladiator. It's the one I keep every 2-3 years. I make my son-in-laws watch it even. It's like, okay, listen, you're going to be in our family, you're watching Gladiator. I don't know why.
Rules are rules, and if they're going to be part of the family. And as we stay around the arts here, who's your favorite band or musical artist?
Oh boy. I think it's funny. You kind of go right back to high school. I'd say the band that I regret not seeing live with the members was the Eagles. I think I probably like the Eagles longer than any other band, more consistently. So I'll say that.
Boy, I'll tell you what, you can't go wrong there, can you? But you know what? You and I are from the same genre, so the same era. And Jeff, what is the best piece of life advice that you have ever received?
I think, just never give up. Just never give up. Just don't quit. I don't even remember. I think I heard it from a lot of people, but it's the one that I would tell our students that the only way you can fail as an artist is if you quit. If you don't quit, you won't fail. And who knows what's going to happen the next day or the next week or the next year, what breakthrough you'll have. You want to fail, quit. Don't quit, you won't fail.
Oh, that is great advice, Jeff. And folks, our special guest today, Jeffrey T. Larson. He's a professional classically trained artist. He owns Great Lakes Academy of Fine Art. You can go on his website, jeffreytlarson.com. And you can also find him on Instagram and on YouTube. And you can see the documentary from Joe Hawkins' East Oak Studio, which is really a fun watch. I just really enjoyed watching it and learning more about you prior to doing this today, Jeff. Thank you so much for being here today. You're really inspirational and for a different type of business, you are certainly leader of the pack.
I really appreciate you inviting me on your show. I listen to it all the time, and what you do with your stores and the Duluth Pack. I mean, I've been using your product since I was a little kid. So anyway, it's a pleasure to meet you and to be on your show.
Jeff, thanks for being here. And folks, until next time, unplug from the indoors and recharge in the outdoors.